Welcome back to the Megatherium Club Podcast, everybody. I hope everyone is having a good holiday season. If this is the time of year you have holidays, if you are in the U.S. or celebrate Christmas, then it is. But for all those that don't fall into either of those categories, how awesome is your life right now? I'm just joking, but I hope everyone's doing great. Spencer, any big plans coming up for this season?
Yeah, I'm going back to Colorado for the first time in about 4 years or so. So I'm really excited to do that. I've seen my family since then. We've always just met up in Minnesota, but this is the year, I guess, going back to the old stomping grounds. So
nice.
Yeah, what about you?
Yeah, we're going back to Indiana here soon to see family, eat food, give the gifts, and drain my social battery about 5 times over. But that's what holidays are for, am I right?
That's the magic.
Yes. So today, though, let's go back. A couple episodes ago, we talked about species that we as humans directly caused to go extinct, which is a never-ending list, I guess it seems these days. But I do want to spread awareness of species that we have saved from extinction. Though, as you will probably find out soon, we are also the reason they were facing elimination from the third rock from the sun in the first place. But we have corrected some of our wrongs and have at least delayed their early exit. Is there anything you want to add to that, Spencer, before we just jump in?
No, that was perfect. Yeah. I was going to definitely highlight the fact that, yes, we caused this, right?
Yep.
This, so
we're
trying to balance our karma, but we still have a long way to go.
I think a cool episode maybe in the future is to find some sort of like extinction level or recent species that has faced extinction, being endangered, threatened, something along those lines that we haven't been part of the reason for.
Yeah.
That might be hard.
But I'm sure it's possible.
Yeah.
So maybe we should do that as a challenge episode just to see what we could come up with. I'm sure there's some pretty nifty things that we could find.
Oh, definitely.
So we'll have to give ourselves like a timeline of how far back we can go, but we'll parse that out in just a bit.
Of course. Well, what do you got for us today?
Okay. So you live do you consider North Carolina the South?
It's south of the Mason-Dixon line, so yes, but everybody that's further south does not consider it the South. But there's enough people here that with a Southern accent that I would say, yeah, it's the South. And 1 is south of the Mason-Dixon, and 3, it's pretty warm most of the year.
Yeah.
So I think so, yes.
Okay, fair enough. I experienced something similar when I lived in Kentucky. But I think Kentucky is technically north of that Mason-Dixon line. But anyway.
Was it really? Was it not?
I think so.
Oh,
God. Now I'm going to have to look that up eventually and correct us in the next episode. So anyway. But I'm fairly confident it was. So anyway, back to the episode here. So you are a pretty close drive. You won't find them where you live, but you can probably just drive a few hours south and start to find my little critter. So if you've ever been in the true south, specifically southeast of the U.S., you've seen these things. They're kind of everywhere. Some consider them nuisance, others, as a spectacle to behold, yada, yada. But that's the American alligator. A species that is just so ingrained into the history of the South and kind of how the South kind of played different roles in really like the fashion markets of the world at one point, which is kind of crazy. So it all revolves around this creature, alligator Mississippiensis. Can't believe I couldn't say that. It's a name after a state. But anyway, it's a lineage so old that it kind of, crocodilian-like creatures have just been around forever, and their body shape has endured through a lot of major extinction events because it works really, really well. So you've probably all seen this. They're long reptiles with scales, armor plating, stuff all kind of over the body, large gaping mouths with some of the strongest bite forces on the planet. And but I'm not here to talk about specifically their ecology or natural history, but they are really important for the environments that they're in, because a lot of people don't know, but they're what's called ecological engineers. And so they change the environment around them for their benefit, but that allows other animals essentially to use what they leave behind for their own benefit. And so one thing that they can do is specifically during drought seasons and stuff like that, they can dig holes where water is held, allowing other animals, fish and turtles and birds and mammals to get access to water and other things that maybe they wouldn't have access to. So they literally change the environment for the better. They also regulate prey. They're just overall really great animals to kind of have around. They live throughout the southeastern United States, down into central, Central America, Mexico, and a little bit farther south. But they're really concentrated in the Americas, where they kind of thrive in freshwater marshes, swamps, rivers, and lakes. They can live up to 80 years. They can grow over to 13 feet long. And for the most part, they don't care about us. We're not their prey items. I think a lot of the alligator attacks that you see in the South are more of a mistaken identity or a provocation of that animal, or people have been feeding it and then it comes in, rather than them actually hunting us. Their relatives on the other side of the planet, like the saltwater crocodiles, those actually do hunt us. But the American alligator, nah, we're just their neighbors that they don't want anything to do with us. So despite the fact that they've been around for millions of years, is basically when we showed up, it almost spelled their doom. So in the 1800s, as the United States was, continuing to develop post the Revolutionary War, there was an untouched, essentially, market. We all hear about the fur traders of the North and getting beavers and stuff like that. But in the South, there was a booming leather industry, specifically alligator hides. It was pretty easy to get. And it's a durable and easy to essentially, it's easy to turn into leather and to send that out. And it was then seen as this super luxurious item throughout Europe, during the 1800s. So when you have a market for something, that demand increases. And so more and more people started hunting them. And by the early 1900s, the alligators were essentially almost gone. You really couldn't find them anymore. If you found them, awesome. That meant hunters and trappers started moving down into Mexico and Central America to keep the supply up, which crashed their populations as well. And at one point, there was only a few individuals that could be found within the Americas. I don't have numbers specifically for this because they weren't really tracking that very well. But it's kind of interesting. So I want to kind of do a little bit of a timeline here, and not everything that I'm going to talk about right now is going to pertain to the alligator specifically, but it does lay the framework and the foundations that would go on to essentially bring this species back to where it is today as an animal that you can find everywhere in the South. So in the 1900s, specifically the year 1900, there was something that was put into place called the Lacey Act. And the Lacey Act made it a federal crime to transport illegally taken wildlife across state lines. And this was put into place by an Iowan Republican, which, this is before the Democrat and Republican parties switched ideology. So, giving a Republican a little bit of a rope throw there. But anyway, so he put together this idea that animals that, we have specific animals that we need to take care of, and we should maintain them at the state level so that individual agencies in the states can maintain how much, trade is going back and forth, and to make sure that people aren't messing with this. But again, that was mostly for things like birds. That's what a lot of this foundation is actually about. In 1937, the Pittman-Robertson Act was essentially created. It created a tax on firearms and ammunitions. And this is super interesting because it essentially said, okay, when you buy guns and you buy ammo, you're going to get an 11% tax on that. And that money then goes directly back into the conservation of these things. Now, initially, when this act was put into place, it was for white-tailed deer, wild turkeys, and wood ducks, because around the 1930s is when all of a sudden we noticed all these species going extinct. And if you've listened to a previous episode, this is when the passenger pigeon went extinct from the landscape, something that had billions of individuals throughout the country all of a sudden vanished. So people are actually starting to notice that we just had less animals. And fast forward a little bit, you get in Alabama in 1941, they said you cannot hunt alligators at all. Crazy. One of the strictest laws put into place in the 1900s surrounding hunting ever. And Alabama was the first one to do it. Florida followed in 1961. They didn't do a total ban, but they said, nope, you cannot harvest them unless if you have special permission. Louisiana joined in 1962 and Texas in 1970. But right before Texas did that, you have something called the Endangered Species Preservation Act of 1966. This was the first federal law that essentially created a list of what we called, at the time, endangered species. That's a word that we all know about today. But this is a little bit different from the next one I'm going to talk to. Essentially was just kind of a list and said, we haven't really seen these individuals a lot in the wild, and we don't want you hunting or harming or killing these species. We're also going to start to put into place some protection for their habitats, specifically on federal lands, and we're going to try to make sure that we can actually bring some of these back. But that act did not have any bite to it. There just wasn't enough enforcement policy behind it to actually make any movement towards a betterment of these species. And in 1973, they decided to kind of redo it, and they introduced what's called the Endangered Species Act, the ESA. Now, this is the one that we still use today and is considered the strongest wildlife laws of all time. This essentially, under this act, species, it is illegal to harm, kill, or harass or sell alligator parts without federal authorization. The American alligator was put onto it in a few years after the endangered species was enacted, and essentially paved the way for these things to come back. So what it said was, we're going to take a look at the American alligator. We're going to see how much habitat they have, what we can do to fix the habitat they have, how can we grow the habitat that they need, where can we put that land, and then how can we implement a way for people to still essentially kind of hunt these things, trap these things for their livelihood, because some people still did rely on that, but make it in a way so that we can control how much flow is going out of these areas. And essentially just set aside funds for, like any other scientific study that you could put together for these species. And by the 1980s, less than a decade later, recovery was booming. Now, there's one group of people that doesn't get enough credit for the recovery of the alligator, and that are the hunters and trappers themselves. So it's really rare that you have a group of people that historically has almost caused or does cause an extinction to be kind of the front runners of their recovery. So when the federal government enacted these laws, the people that were, like you have one of two choices, I guess. The people that hunted and trapped them, they faced a choice, right? Where they could get mad and, either quit the profession or just do it illegally, or they can realize that, hey, my livelihood is actually potentially going to go away if something isn't done. And so a lot of hunters and trappers essentially bought up land, donated it to the federal government for conservation, or essentially worked with the federal government to create habitat that would help the alligator. A lot of them would become scientists that actually monitored populations over time. So a little bit of like weird pseudoscience, like citizen science and stuff over that. And so, it started to work really well. And in 1987, there was a reclassification of the American alligator. So they removed the endangered species status and reclassified it as, quote, threatened due to the similarity of appearance. So I was a little confused at that when I first read it. So it's a category that allows state-regulated sustainable harvests, but the federal government can still, essentially still has control over the illegal trade of them. And then it has protection for other crocodilians that resemble the alligator. Because in the South, we don't just have the American alligator. We also have the American crocodile or the Cuban crocodile. And so we want to protect not only the American alligator, but things that look like it. By 1987, this reclassification was put into place, and the alligator population has essentially boomed back. It also helps that fashion for alligator hide, basically, by the 1930s, the Great Depression was hitting the U.S., but not only the U.S., but a lot of the world. And so the demand for high fashion, luxurious hides and leathers kind of started to plummet. But people in the South still use alligators for their hides, still use alligators for their meat and stuff like that. So the demand never vanished, but it did decrease significantly. So that also helped with that. So I have a lot of other stuff here that I don't know if I necessarily want to get into. So I think I'll kind of end it there with the American alligator, but I don't know.
One thing, I just want to interrupt a little bit. One thing, the farthest north habitat of the American alligator is actually the northeast tip of North Carolina.
So I looked
Merchant
up
Mills Pond, and I've been there.
You have? Okay, so they have been seen in there. Is that something like, are they continuoso seen in there? Is that like a
when I went there, I
habitat?
didn't see them when I was there, but it's a huge
okay,
bog,
so it's not just like some
swamp thing.
Little thing. Okay,
so they're not like booming, but I guess they've been up there. I don't know how many's up there. I didn't look into that, but so if they live in the South, then I live in the South, because they are actually further north than I am located.
They're further north than
that's
you,
basically Virginia there. And then it was cool that you brought this up, because I was just talking about this with my coworker who's big into trapping and stuff. And one of the best ways to save an animal is to just start regulated hunting on it. And you said it's like kind of like a rare thing, and I think I don't think it's super rare.
I think I meant to say it's historically rare.
Oh, okay. Because I think it's quite common nowadays.
Nowadays, yeah. I mean, it works for the polar bear. I mean, it works for the Kodiak grizzlies, the wolves, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I was thinking like specifically in the 1800s, early 1900s.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, definitely.
It was very uncommon. Yeah. But I see what you mean.
Which may be a bit ironic for a vegan to say, but the thing is, like your average conservationist, or I'll even say vegan, isn't donating money to save wildlife, but a lot of conservationist hunter trapper people are throwing money so that they can all participate in trapping and hunting of these animals, and they don't want the stock to go away. So they'll do what they can to continue their hobbies, if you will. If you're not a hunter trapper, your hobby is just admiring the animal from afar. Not every one of those people are throwing money at the conservation efforts, which, I'm sure there are those that do donate, but maybe it's not as easy, if you're not into hunting, or if you're not, your taxes aren't going, or your trapping license and stuff like that you're not buying those. How do you donate money to save the American alligator or turkey or something like that? Another example of this is a book I was reading about bats. Well, as you may not be too surprised, there are a lot of countries in the Asian parts of the world that eat bats, and it's a delicacy. But there's no limits on eating these bats and consuming and hunting them, and so there are a lot of bat numbers were decreasing until some scientists put it together that these guys are bringing out bags of bats daily to supply restaurants, and then the government stepped in, and some scientists, they said, well, you know what, and this is a bat biologist, he's dedicated his entire life to bats. They helped the government set limits and regulated the hunting, and they've made great leaps on recovering these species, and the poaching is down. Well, you'd think it would be up, but I guess it's.
I mean, for most people, it's probably just easier to follow the law.
Oh yeah,
than risk it,
and some of the countries just straight up banned it, and it became less of an even a delicacy in restaurants because it was an illegal thing to do. So the demand of it even crashed, but there are still limits and bag limits. Maybe that's the right term, that these bat hunters could collect and supply to restaurants. And so that was just another example I wanted to share.
I'm sure COVID didn't help with the image of eating bats.
Oh yeah, probably not.
Which honestly, if it helps bat populations, then I'm all for it. So
true.
Yeah, sweet. So I don't know. I picked two. This was my second choice over my other one. And I just remember talking a little bit about this when I worked at a zoo and was around alligators and stuff. And it was always kind of fun to kind of talk about and to say, this was an animal that we almost lost. And, here we have 5 of them and they're healthy and thriving, and let's share a little bit about them.
Awesome. Good topic.
The zoo also offered me to take one home.
An alligator?
Yep.
What?
Yep. It's a private little tiny zoo, so it's not like a federally regulated thing.
Gotcha.
And they rescue a lot of animals. And there was a tiny little baby alligator that I took care of, during the winter while all the other ones were put into the hibernaculum.
Oh, yep.
And he was too small to go into into hibernation, so I just had him in my room and I would hang out with him every night. And they're like, when I left, they're like, do you want to take him with you? I'm like, yes, of course I want to take him with me. He also hates me.
Oh, no.
Because he's an alligator.
Yep.
But I think we would have a good time. But unfortunately, most states you can't own one. So,
yeah. I don't know what the law is here, but wouldn't be surprised if it is illegal here in North Carolina.
Yeah. Even some of the states where you're like, yeah, they let you get away with anything. They usually don't let you get away with an alligator.
Yeah. Well, my animal today is we keep doing this where we pick similar topics, or I guess similar
perfect
types of animals, I should say. I wanted to talk about an animal that to this day I am very confused about, but also fascinated at the same time, and that is the tuatara. Sphenodon punctatus? Punctatus? See?
You got me there.
Work in progress. Tuatara is Maori for peaks on the back, by the way, so I guess that gives away the country it is found in, New Zealand. This is a species of reptile that has 4 legs, is greenish in color, about 30 inches in length, and between 2 and 3 pounds. It does have spines along its back, kind of like an iguana, but not as prominent. A mouth full of teeth, but actually 2 rows in the top and 1 on the bottom. No external ear, much like that of other reptiles. And now that I have probably put a picture in your head, well, I hope so if you are listening, of what this animal looks like, I'm sure the description or the image you have in your head looks like a generic lizard. But this is not a lizard. And that's one of the crazy facts about this little reptile. Snakes and lizards belong to the order Squamata, while tuataras
10 out of 10 word, by the way.
Squamata?
Yeah, just
yeah.
It's so good.
Wow.
There's so many vowels in it. It's just such a good word.
I'm about to butcher the next one, though.
Perfect. I'm excited. Here we go.
So tuataras are in a sister taxa called Rhynchocephalia. That actually wasn't that bad.
That was good.
Yeah, it makes me want to say rhino, but it's not. It's Rhynchocephalia. And they're the only living member of this lineage. This order first shows up in the fossil record about 244 to 241 million years ago, which is also around the time we see the first squamates in the fossil record. So I can't really say which is older, but that is where their evolutionary lines separated and it seems, and was during the Middle Triassic. And while tuataras of today have maintained morphological characteristics of their ancestors from 240 million years ago, there's no proof that these are the same continuous species from then. So they're often considered living fossils, but have had slight changes over time from their ancestors, like minor changes in their DNA, or physical characteristics as well. So they're not technically living fossils. The species has probably persisted over hundreds of thousands, if not a million years, but not 240 million years. But what is different about them from lizards, you might ask? Because, yeah, they do just look like a lizard. And anybody that, doesn't know it is just going to look at them and be like, oh, look, that's a lizard.
I'm one of those.
Are you? Okay.
Yep, I'm one of those.
There are a number of differences between them when you look at the jaw morphology, and I could probably talk about this a while, but I'll keep it short because a lot of it's a little bit over my head as far as morphology goes. They do have this beak-like front portion of their jaw that is common in rhynchocephalians. They also have teeth that are fused to the jawbone in a way that makes it kind of difficult to even identify where the tooth ends and the jawbone begins, which is not the case in lizards. Another perhaps more interesting fact that separates them from most other lizards is their parietal eye, or their third eye, and this is located on top of its head. And yes, it has a lens, a parietal plug similar to a cornea, a retina with rods, and a nerve connection, though less than regular eyes, to the brain. This third eye is only visible in hatchlings, though, as it becomes covered with opaque scales and pigment. It is not great at detecting everything their regular eyes can see, such as movement or images, but is still useful in detecting light and probably assists in their circadian rhythm. Of all tetrapods, the tuatara does have the most prominent parietal eye. So that fact has stuck with me since I was probably elementary school, reading some encyclopedia, and was like, what? This lizard thing has 3 eyes? It took me probably another decade before I realized it wasn't even a lizard. So this thing just becomes more and more fascinating to me. But okay, on to today's topic and why this weird little reptile fits into it. Tuataras were once widespread throughout the mainlands of both North and South Islands of New Zealand. Prior to European settlement, they were already pushed to the islands offshore. Polynesian settlers brought with them Pacific rats, or kiori. I have also heard them called Polynesian rats. The tuatara were pretty easy prey for these rodents. Islands offshore acted as a sanctuary from the rats, but over time they were able to spread to these islands as well as other new introduced mammal species. In 1895, these ancient reptiles were granted legal protection, and the islands they were occupied. Oh my gosh. In 1895, these ancient reptiles were granted legal protection as well as the islands they occupied, but their population continued to decline, with localized populations becoming extinct as recent as 1984. But conservation efforts have reversed the decline since. Rat eradication was the first step. On some islands, conservationists were able to remove all of the tuatara, or hopefully most of them, take them back to captivity, and start a breeding program, while other efforts were underway to exterminate the rats on the islands while the lizards were taken care of. Not lizards, Sean. Wow, that's... See, I forget, and I did the research on this. While the reptiles were taken care of, the rats were being taken care of in another way. I wanted to see, though, if there was a cool or unique way that they were eradicating these rats, but all I could find is just poison bait and traps, which seems like a proven method for this rat, because a number of islands in the Pacific have undergone these eradication procedures, I guess. Once the island is deemed rat-free, they release all the tuatara back, or in this case, they release them all back, including the juveniles. And this seems to be the story over and over again on these islands all around New Zealand. They are really resilient reptiles in the absence of rats and other invasive introduced mammalian species, humans, but thankfully humans have aided them in their bounce back from their brink of extinction. There have been a number of successful breeding programs throughout New Zealand, including ones at the Southland Museum and Art Gallery in Invercargill. I don't think I went there. I've been to Invercargill. It's the southernmost part of the southern island. I think there's opportunities to leave from there to Antarctica, but I didn't go to this museum, which now I regret. The Hamilton Zoo, the Auckland Zoo, and the Wellington Zoo also all had successful breeding programs. And a recent addition to this, I guess, club, if you will, is the Chester Zoo in England in 2016. And I think that's the only one that's been outside of their native habitat, native range. There's a cool success story of a 110-year-old male and an 80-year-old female producing 11 eggs that all successfully hatched. The male even had to undergo surgery to remove a cancerous tumor so it was even possible for it to breed. And that, I guess they live pretty old then. that's
incredible.
Yeah.
Just that fact alone.
Yeah, 110-year-old humans aren't producing these days.
No.
There has been some success of even returning the reptiles to the mainland since the early 2000s. So they'll kind of fence off areas and make certain areas quote unquote rat free, but they're protected by some sort of animal proof wiring or fence around areas. So I think that's been the case here. I tried to find numbers to show how much of a success this has been, but that proved difficult. I found estimates around 100,000 or more tuataras exist today, but I'm not sure if anyone has a good estimate for how low the population once was, like in the 1980s. And I did forget to include a little bit here where there's actually two geographically separated subspecies. The northern, which is Sphenodon punctatus, and the Brothers Island tuatara is the Sphenodon guntheri, which is more rare and restricted to the North Brother Island in the Cook Strait. And scientists realized these were actually just geographic variants, and really only one species should be recognized. So while the Brothers tuatara is more olive-colored and smaller, they are now known as Sphenodon punctatus guntheri, and the northern one is just Sphenodon punctatus punctatus. But they're really cool. I don't know if you have seen them. I'm sure you've seen what they look like, Spencer. But
yeah, I've heard of them and seen them, but I just, I don't know if I ever heard them in the context of not a lizard.
Oh.
Yeah. So
they're pretty cool. Not an animal that hunting conservation efforts have brought back, but just genuine love and passion for nature brought back.
Yeah, and that's not a bad thing to have either. So
no,
yeah.
So
I hope you and I can go. I would love to go to New Zealand, and I hope you and I can go, and we can go look for these lizards in the wild or something.
Absolutely.
They'll be like, oh yes, those famous podcasters are here.
Yeah.
Those influencers. We should let them roam the islands and look for these not lizards. So
I do love New Zealand. I would love to go back.
I would just love to go.
Yeah.
So sweet. Well, I have another one I'll wrap it up here with. Just because I have to talk about this one, because like you, this didn't stick with me from my childhood, but it did stick with me from my time when I studied abroad. So there is an area that I did not go to, but I went to the country that it's in. It's called the Kihansi Gorge in Tanzania. It is a gorge, obviously, so cliff with a waterfall creating the gorge, and the waterfall is incredibly high, and it's one of those waterfalls where the water falls for so long that a lot of it, by the time it gets down to the bottom, has become this mist that essentially covers the surrounding area continuously with water. And there's lots of those around the world, but this one in particular has a little toad that can sit on a dime, and this little toad is one of the most incredible comeback stories ever. Weirdly enough, so all the animals that we talked about this episode are either reptile or amphibian. And I think that just goes to show that, these are some of the most vulnerable groups. But luckily for us, they're also some of the easiest groups to bring back. Mammals are a lot harder because reptiles and amphibians have lots of babies where mammals do not for the most part. So anyway, so there's this little toad. It's called the Kihansi spray toad, Necrophyroid. I butchered that all to hell. I practiced it. I had it. Nectophrinoides. Aspergillus.
There it is.
Christ. Ugh. Anyway, at least we're consistent in some aspect. So they live only around this waterfall, and like the major global area of them is about 2 acres. But in history, you might have been able to find some in a surrounding area of about 2 hectares, but that's not a lot of area. You can only find this toad around this waterfall, essentially. There's not a lot of history known about them. I couldn't find a whole lot, essentially, information about them prior to the 1990s. But that's when this story begins. So, I guess I'll start with okay, they're an amphibian. They're technically a toad. And like a lot of amphibians that live in rainforests, specifically in areas with a lot of water continuously flowing throughout that area, they don't lay eggs, as the risk of the eggs being washed away is too high. So instead, they do give birth to live young. So the adults are incredibly small. They can fit onto a dime. The babies, when they're born, are barely bigger than a pinhead. They're not large creatures, but they've created a very large cult following. So, yes, think of your kind of typical tropical rainforest. Lots of ferns, lots of club mosses, lots of things like that. This is where they kind of thrive. Now, prior to around the late 1990s, early estimates of their population size around then fluctuated around 17,000 individuals in the wild. It could go anywhere, a few thousand less to, a few thousand more, just kind of naturally, like a lot of species do over time. But in about 1999, a hydropower dam was put into place upstream of the waterfall and reduced the waterfall's flow rate by about 90%, which is unbelievable. So you have what was once a grand waterfall is now basically your sink tap, right? So when the water stopped flowing, the frogs did okay for a little while. It took them a few years. Their populations kind of sustained themselves for a little bit, but things started to change. As the gorge started to dry out, the vegetation changed and the temperature shifted. And soon the toad population started to reflect those changes and they started to crash. And then, unfortunately, around 2004, this fungus called, I think I'm gonna say this right, the chytrid or chytrid fungus, is a disease that specifically attacks amphibians. Evidently, there was this worldwide pandemic of this fungus for lots of tropical frogs, and these spray toads were not exempt from that, and it took their population in the wild basically to the last time in around 2004 to 3 individuals. Only 2 males were heard and only 1 female was found. So they were there's 3. In 2005, you couldn't find a frog. The frog was declared extinct officially in 2009, but any scientist that you talk about will say they were gone in the wild in 2005. The fungus was the final nail in that coffin for them. But luckily, scientists who were studying the area saw this coming. And they took 499 individuals from the wild and brought them to 3 facilities. The Bronx Zoo, the Toledo Zoo in Ohio, and the University of Dar es Salaam, where they said, okay, this frog is about to go extinct. We need to start breeding them in captivity to save them. We're gonna work on the gorge, but in the meantime, let's get these frogs, settled. But not a lot was known about their specific natural history and their breeding habits and stuff like that. So you take an animal that basically we know nothing about, you put it into captivity with no knowledge about how to actually care for them, and things crashed. Even in captivity, their population crashed a few years later to where there was only 72 of these found in the world. In the wild, they were gone. In captivity, there was only 72 left. But luckily, and around 2007, 2008, by God, they figured it out. I couldn't find like what specific facility like maybe figured this out, or if all of them kind of figured it out at the same time, but they figured it out. And so while this was kind of going on in the background, they went back to the gorge and they said, okay, well, the Tanzanian government is not going to let us undo this hydropower dam. Like, that's not happening. So we're not going to get the flow rate back to what it was. It's gone. So what they did instead was pretty genius. They essentially took some of the water that was being held in the dam and they ran it down through a series of pipes and put up an entire array of sprinkler systems that would run continuously, and brought back this mist that was once created by the waterfall is now created by this immense and immaculate like sprinkler system that they set up. And they let that go for a few years to bring back the water, to bring back the plants that these frogs live and breed on. And, when the plants come back, the pests come back, and that's their food and stuff like that. So luckily, they were essentially, the slowdown of the breeding in captivity allowed them to rebuild this gorge to essentially back to kind of what it was. It'll never be perfect, obviously, but it's pretty gosh darn close. And in 2012, they were able to take 5,200 toads and release them back into the gorge. And their populations have steadily grown since then. I can't find specific numbers around them. They're nowhere near that 17,000 mark. There's about 6,000 or so in the wild is the guesstimates that I could find, and about 6,000 or so in captivity throughout these three facilities. They're going to keep doing these breeding programs, keep releasing them to essentially help maintain some of that population, because the population is just going to take for so long to come back, if it ever will naturally. There's not, with the dam being just a permanent structure, it's likely never going to bounce back to what it was naturally. So we'll always kind of have to do some of our own releasings to kind of supplement some of that. But, if it works, so be it. And yeah, I mean, it's incredible to find a species that literally went extinct in the wild, gone. Managed to save some, almost went extinct in captivity, but managed to go bounce from 72 to, thousands, tens of thousands, right? And yeah, the reason I know about these is because when I was in Tanzania studying abroad, they brought us around to one of the facilities that was breeding them. They didn't let us inside because the risk of spreading disease to the frogs is way too high. But they have these really large windows that essentially allow you to look into the terrariums that these toads are held in. And so, yeah, I just, for some reason, they always stuck in the back of my mind. And when you said you wanted to do an episode about bringing something back from extinction, I was like, this is the one I got to do.
Nice.
So, anyway, the little spray toad. I'm pretty sure I said frog like 4 times through that, but it's fine.
It's like almost as bad as me calling a tuatara a lizard.
When
it was my fun fact that it wasn't a lizard.
Right. I'm glad I didn't make it my fun fact.
Yeah. That's cool.
Anyway. Yeah.
So we're not always that bad.
Yeah. I think, I mean, that's kind of the beauty of it all at the end of the day is like, like you got to think about, we've done a lot of bad, but at least we're still trying to do good.
Yeah.
And I think one of the issues is that we're facing today is that, as we move into specific administrations in the U.S., not only here, but worldwide, some of those rollbacks are starting to occur that actually takes away some of these protections. And I think people on both sides of the aisle are angry at that, and that's a good thing. So, vote accordingly in all elections if you want to keep these species coming back rather than them just going away forever like our last episode or whatever. So,
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, love it.
Perfect. It's a good episode.
Yeah, a good one for the holidays. I think we'll get another one probably recorded before the holidays, right?
That'd be awesome. We get 2 out.
Yeah. I think we can get 2. Yeah,
so. Perfect.
Yeah. All right. Well, with that, I think we'll end it there. And how.